Hello, this is my screencast for my assessment unit plan. The first thing that we had to do for our unit was just to select the standards that we wanted to create the assessments based off of. I chose math and science standards just because math is one of my favorite subjects and I knew that I would enjoy creating math-related assessments better. I chose two core standards, which you can see here and here, and then I went with one content area standard. The standards that I chose had to do with things like measuring objects, estimating lengths, and also choosing the correct measuring tool to use when you're measuring those lengths. And then the content area that I chose had to do with measuring lengths as well as temperature. The second thing we had to do was to create a performance assessment and then to create a checklist and rubric to go along with that. And this right here is the performance task that I created. It says in groups of 2 or 3 students will, number 1, estimate the lengths of different classroom objects. Number 2, measure the classroom objects, and 3, identify the tool that they used for measuring. Down here you can see on my rubric that the categories I grouped them into were 1, estimation of lengths, measuring the objects, choosing the measuring tool, and then working with others. I especially thought that the working with others was important to be included on this part because, you know, they're working in groups and how well that they can cooperate with their teammates has a lot to do with how well they'll succeed on the assignment. And then on my checklist, I just had questions that would be beneficial to them, maybe help them if they made a mistake. They could, while they're going through the checklist, it could maybe trigger something for them and help them make a correction before they turned it in. The third thing that we had to do for our unit was to research and find a learning styles assessment that we could use in our classroom at an elementary level. And I found this really good one online. Let me get it opened up for you. Here it is. And I thought that it would be really useful for a teacher in a classroom. They could print it out and have the students fill it out, and then it would be easy for the teacher to keep on record and refer back to. But what it does, it just asks different questions, and you put a check if you do one of those things, and then at the end of each section you tally up how many checks you have for that section. And then at the very end you can compare which area you had the most checks or the least, or maybe you had tied in a few areas, and then it will describe, you know, how you learn best based on each category. After that, we created a self-evaluation and a peer evaluation, and since I already had a group activity for my performance assessment, I just used that same assessment for the self and peer evaluations. And on them, you can see I gave a list of 5 being entirely agree, 1 being entirely disagree. I just thought that would be easier for the students to understand that way, going by numbers. You can tell that I had more questions on the self-evaluation than the peer evaluation simply because I figured, you know, a student could better assess themselves than they could somebody else. And then on both of them I also gave area for the students to write comments if they had anything that maybe wasn't addressed in just the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 part of the evaluation. One thing that I paid particular attention to on the evaluations was how well that the students worked with their partners and if they equally participated, because that could go both ways. It could be taking over the assignment or maybe not adding in enough input, so that was something that I really wanted to make sure was included. The fifth thing that we created for our unit was a diagnostic assessment tool, And I wanted to use this worksheet because I hadn't really done very much with temperature yet, so I wanted to make sure that I did include that into my unit. And you can see it just has different temperatures listed in this based on the different cities, and the students could enter that. And then on this one, you can see it's measuring lengths, and then it also has inches and centimeters so that they can compare them that way, and I thought that was really neat. And then also here, I just love this worksheet because it listed the specific standards that the worksheets addressed, and I thought that could be very beneficial to the students as well as the teachers and even the parents. So I just thought that was really interesting and neat. The next assessment we created had to incorporate technology into it, and the one that I chose to use, it's kind of a more informal formative assessment. If I can get my mouse to go to the link. This is what it looks like, and you would click to start, and then it would ask a question: which is the closest to the height of a 3-story building? And I would say 30 feet, submit your answer, and then it will tell you if it's correct or not, and then play a cute little video, which I thought was really interesting, and that would be very engaging to the students that way. And then say which is the closest to the width of a basketball. Like, if you got the answer wrong, I would just to see, it will tell you, sorry, the answer is incorrect. And then at the end you can click to submit and see your scores, and it just has a real cute video. So I just thought it was really great, and I took the test several times and it has different questions every time, so I thought that, that would be good if you had 2 students working beside each other. That way they wouldn't be able to copy off of each other. They would each get different questions, but it would still be the same format type thing, and I just thought that was so cool. Our next assessment was formative and modified formative assessments, and I found this picture on the internet, and I just thought it went so well with the topic, and a lot of it correlates with what we've talked about in class this semester. Just simply that accommodations could be extra time on an assignment, larger print, using Braille if it's a student with a vision impairment. But it could just be, numerous things. And so, see, my mouse is having difficulties. This is the formative assessment that I created. It's just kind of like a simple 10-question quiz, which asks questions dealing with which tool to use, estimating which would be, the best measurement for this object. If I were using a ruler, which object am I likely to be measuring? And then I even added some questions that dealt with temperature and then actually measuring a line with a ruler. And for my modified assessment, I just had 2 multiple choices instead of 4, which I had up here. I had 4 choices. For the modified, I just had 2 choices for each question. That way my students would be tested on the same content, just modified that way. I kind of did the same thing with my summative and modified summative assessments. You can see I have the same picture on this one as I do the formative assessments, because the accommodations that you make for your students should be the same regardless of what kind of assessment it is, and it shouldn't just, the modification should not just show up at the summative assessment. It should be an ongoing thing. So for my summative assessment, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit differently than I did for my formative assessment. So I created fill in the blank questions for the beginning of the test, and then I had a word bank for the students to choose from just 9 questions, fill in the blank, which it's basically the same kind of questions that I used for the multiple choice questions that I had for the formative assessment. They're just in a different format. So if they did well on the multiple choice, they should do well on this as well. And then I had also multiple choice questions to follow the fill in the blank here. For my modified assessment, I split the word bank from the regular summative assessment into 3 different word banks. That way it wouldn't be so overwhelming maybe for students who have trouble with that. That way they would only have 3 choices for the first 3 questions and 3 for the next, and then 3 for the next 3. And then when it got to the multiple choice questions, I just had 2 choices like I did previously on the formative assessment. I thought that that would, be very well for them, so I just kept it that way. The final thing we had to do was tell how each of the assessments that we've had to create for our unit correlate to the Danielson model. And I was just amazed at how much they actually do correlate whenever I did this assignment. The first performance assessment with the checklist and the rubric, that can correlate with Domain 1 as well as Domain 3. In Domain 3, it talks about communicating with your students' expectations for learning, directions, explanations, and the rubric does all of those things. It specifically gives expectations of what students need to do to achieve a certain grade. And then also just providing feedback to your students is really important. When dealing with the learning styles assessment, that also correlates to Domain 1 because it says students are supposed to have knowledge of their students, and that is what teachers do whenever they give the learning styles assessment. They use it to gain knowledge of their students and then use that to change their instruction if needed, which will fall under Domain 3. The self-evaluation and peer evaluations falls under Domain 3. Student self-assessment and monitoring of progress. And then also if the teacher needs to again make modifications to her instruction or his instruction, then that would fall under Domain 3 as well. The diagnostic assessment tool would fall under prerequisite relationships, so knowing what your students should know before and after, and then also it would fall under just knowing your students. The assessments using technology would fall under Domain 3, the part talking about engaging your students in learning, because technology does just that. It would also fall under Domain 1, knowledge of resources and utilization of those resources. Creating formative and modified formative assessments, as well as summative and modified summative assessments, will fall under Domain 1, the category of designing student assessments, as well as demonstrating knowledge of students in Domain 1 as far as knowing when the assessments need to be modified, as well as making sure that the assessments correlate to the standards that you are required to teach. They also align with Domain 3, which is demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness if assessments need to be modified. And it is also a professional responsibility under Domain 4 to monitor the progress of your students. I hope you enjoyed going through my unit with me. It was a lot of work, but I learned so much and I'm really glad that I did it.